Well, hello everyone. I must admit, I am shocked at the number of people that there are in the MIT blockchain course. Sam and Yida both said that this is like the most oversubscribed course. I can't figure out if that's because you all aped in during the bull market and now can't dump the credits, or or if there's actually some great interest here. I hope it's the latter. I'm here to talk about what makes a crypto protocol different, or starting a crypto protocol different to starting a regular company. And I'm happy to talk in the Q&A about my more broader entrepreneurial experience, but for now let's keep it onto sort of the art of the start of Web3 protocols. But okay, before any of that, I just want to address one thing, which is this current crypto winter. It started off, it wasn't a winter in the beginning, it started off with a storm called Luna, and then a hurricane called Three Arrows Capital, and then a full-blown blizzard called, or let's say a geostorm called FTX. And now we've got like this nuclear winter of the SEC going after pretty much everyone. Coinbase, Crypto.com, Gemini, you name it, right? But is focusing on these things, is focusing on these things in the price of Bitcoin sort of not seeing the forest for the trees? When you think about it, Bitcoin started off as, in 2013, in 2009, sorry, but in 2013 there was the first crash, and it went from, what was it? Well, it dropped about 89%, I remember. And then in 2017, I also remember it dropped another 85, 86%. And then most recently, it dropped from 65,000 to what, about 69,000 to 16,000 at its low, I think, right? The point is that, throughout this whole time, we've had innovations in technology, and we've had an evolution of that technology. It started off with Bitcoin, but then we've had tokenization, which was a huge boom, DeFi, which was a huge boom, NFTs, stable coins, creator economies. I mean, sorry, not creator economies, decentralized storage. I mean, there have been all these booms, and now we're at a winter again. So I would hazard a guess to say that the people who sow in this winter are the ones that will reap in the spring, and the spring is coming. Bitcoin's at 30,000 now, so that's an indication that there is some recovery coming. But the fact of the matter remains that A, there's new innovation, and B, it seems that we have a new technology which has created functionality which is inherently interesting and useful and important to humanity or us as humans, and that's just not going to change. It doesn't matter what the price is, right? So I would, take it from a crypto grandpa, right? I was around when Bitcoin was an altcoin and Doge was just a dog, right? And I've seen these swings, and I think that the next swing up will actually be one of the biggest. So I congratulate you all for being here, and I hope I've given you some hope as to the fact that this is just a winter coming into what will be ideally a pretty fantastic summer. Moving on to what it takes to start a Web3 protocol and why that's different. Okay, so in 2017, I just sold a agency, and my brand incubator was kicking off. And then I had bought Bitcoin in 2011, but in 2017 I discovered, or I met the inventor of a protocol called the hash graph. It's a consensus mechanism. And as I started to think about starting this protocol, about creating this thing, it felt very, very different to me. Why? Because I was always of the mindset that when you start a company, you create value for shareholders, right? This is a very, very different and weird mindset, because when I was starting this company, I wasn't starting it for shareholders or this project. I think it was more along the lines of I was trying to create a public utility that would be owned and managed by a community in a decentralized way. All right? That's a very, very different thing to do. It's building a network as opposed to a company. Since we're at MIT, today I wanted to instead go over some of the design considerations and ideologies that are unique to building the protocol, or a decentralized network. So there are 4 of these: decentralization, permissionlessness or permissionless, trustless or trustlessness, and credible neutrality. So, and I want to explore a little bit of these in depth and tell you about my experience of them. So the first is decentralization. If you had Gary Gensler, who I know is a professor here, Vitalik Buterin, and a Bitcoin maxi walk into a bar and ask for a drink of decentralization, the bartender would literally serve them 3 different drinks. And the protocol GC, our protocol GC, would be in the corner doing shots of tequila because she couldn't figure out how to be compliant, And I think the point of that is to say that there are so many different factors that you can look at to say whether or not something is decentralized or not. It was, I think, 2 weeks ago, I saw a tweet where someone tweeted 24 different considerations of decentralization. Geodiversity, the Nakamoto coefficient, how many nodes are in the network, is it permissionless, trustlessness? I mean, you name it, it was there. And the problem with this is in the absence of guidance, of clear regulatory guidance from the SEC or the government, what is happening is that protocols are forced to come up with their own, their own definitions, and then they sort of have to gut check it using the community. And then there's this whole, debate going on in the community. It's not an ideal situation. And so it's probably also worth noting that, so the first thing is, I do think that we need a very clear, we need clearer guidance on what decentralization means, at least from a regulatory perspective. And hopefully it's coming. The first thing is, with decentralization, you may have decentralization, but there are always going to be sort of centralizing forces. An example of that is mining pools, or in proof of stake networks, you have the accumulation, high coin concentration. And flashbots are a great example of centralizing forces as well. Now, and then under proof of work systems, you have version control, which is an issue. So you don't just have Bitcoin. Remember, Bitcoin's separated into Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin Cash, right? Because of the different sort of versions that you can have. Another point, another difficulty with decentralization, which some people would say has largely been solved, is scalability. The reason it's an issue is because if everyone in this room has to keep a record of every transaction, or process it, or validate it, etc., it's both 1, wasteful, 2, takes a lot of time, right? So there are several solutions to this, and that's what a lot of the more innovative consensus protocols are. But it is worth noting that that is like an underlying tension within decentralization. You can spread the computation around, but does that make it less efficient, less effective, like slower, right? And that was the original criticism. It was one of the criticisms of Bitcoin and Ethereum too in the beginning. And it left the door open for protocols like Solana, for example. And then you have attack vectors. So the most popular attack vector is, probably the most well-known, is one called a Sybil attack. I asked your teachers if you know what a Sybil attack is, but in summary, a Sybil attack is where you sort of flood the network with malicious nodes, right? And then thus overwhelm its consensus mechanism. And then you have what we call the Byzantine fault attacks, where you have a collusion of over a third of nodes, and then that can sort of overwhelm the decision making with sort of non-ideal outcome. Now, none of these are insurmountable. I just wanted to highlight them to you because these are literally the things we think about as we're designing Nillion, and as some of the things we are thinking about. And while they may seem very academic, these attacks do occur in real life, and they are things that we deeply think about from from our cryptography team to our legal team to our protocol team. So decentralization, a very important North Star to go towards, but isn't easy because you've got these issues to consider. And then you've got permissionlessness, or being permissionless. Now, you guys I was again told that you have covered to some degree permissionlessness. Just to briefly recap, it is when when nodes can freely join the network and participate in consensus. That's what being permissionless is. So why not have permissionless networks everywhere? What's the problem, right? Well, the problem is if I open up this classroom filled with all these MIT students that I trust with malicious Harvard students from across the lake, then we'll never reach consensus. Okay? It's a real problem. So that's what what we call a Sybil attack. Now, how do you stop that? Well, you can use a proof of stake system where every vote is aligned with ownership of the coin. What's the problem with that? Well, consider it from our point of view. This is when Nillion, we're a new protocol, or at the very beginning of Hedera, or any other protocol. The problem is that when your market cap is still small, you fear that someone might buy a bunch of pseudonymous nodes and then just buy a third of your processing capacity and thus instigate a Byzantine attack, right? They might just be able to buy their way into controlling your network. So how do you stop that? How do you prevent that? Well, you could move to a proof of work system. That wouldn't be ideal because it's slower. What else could you do? Well, I guess what I'll do is I'll just control in the beginning my voting power within a centralized space, right? In my foundation, or me, or the founders, whatever. Then you have the issue of not being decentralized. You see how you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place? And so it really creates this difficult tension. And it's also why I actually opt towards a standard for when you're creating protocols of progressive decentralization, right? Or progressive permissionlessness, moving towards that goal, so that you can avoid these sorts of situations. If you really think about it, Bitcoin started off with just Satoshi running a Bitcoin miner. And at that point in time, that's quite centralized, right? But someone has to start it. And then at that point in time, it was also it was vulnerable towards attack at that point in time, presumably. So I think that the general standard is one where you should progressively move towards both permissionlessness and to decentralization. Now, the definition and the word trustless. Trustless basically refers to the quality of a decentralized system where you don't have to trust a third party. This is a tough one, and I really don't like when this one's used because I don't believe blockchains are trustless. I think they're trust minimizing. I think that what they're doing is spreading that trust over several actors within a environment who are all incentivized, economically incentivized to take the right action, right? But so an example of that, in the Layer 0 protocol, for example, I really like Layer 0, by the way, but you have to make sure. Well, the general trust assumption is that you're trusting that the relayer and the oracle are not colluding together, right? In the Cosmos, which is Tendermint consensus mechanism, you have roughly now, I think, 175 nodes that are coming to consensus. You're trusting that 175 of those, a certain proportion of those nodes aren't colluding. They're not bad trust assumptions, mind you, right? I'm not saying that they're not trustworthy. Are they trustless? Like, what's the standard you're going for? I'm not quite sure. And this is what factors into protocol design, both the way in which the community and smart people like you interpret the level of trust that can be given to a protocol, but also what the actual level of trust is and how robust it is against attack. I tend to think that the true definition of trustlessness or a trustless setup is actually when you trust the mathematics, not an incentive system. So zero knowledge protocols and other cryptographic protocols like the hash function, etc. I think those are truly trustless. So given these definitions and the flexibility and the debate in them, what is a good guiding principle when you're trying to create a protocol? I actually really like the principle of what Vitalik, I think he popularized it, I'm not sure if he invented it, but called credible neutrality. Credible neutrality is, a mechanism is credibly neutral if just by looking at the mechanism's design, it is easy to see that the mechanism does not discriminate for or against any specific people, which is basically broken down into 4 rules. 1, don't write specific people or outcomes into the mechanism. 2, open source and publicly verifiable execution. 3, keep it simple. And 4, don't change it too often. I really like this principle. Having designed several, been part of the process of designing several protocols, I truly think that that's a good principle to go by. So, what's the conclusion here? Well, each one of the characteristics that we've discussed offers specific challenges and constraints when you're making the protocol decisions. Whether those constraints be in business, technical, or even for incentive design reasons. Ultimately, decentralized systems are this new thing, and they're still evolving. And how these ideologies should be weighted and applied in the context of each protocol is both, a deeply ideological question and one which is uniquely attuned to both the stage of the protocol, the growth, the stage, the goals, and the technology itself. And the use case, actually, especially now as decentralized use cases expand beyond transactions. But I truly believe that in today's landscape, there's no canonically correct answer of what the right mix is. But I think that it is that the legitimate startups that are experimenting with these factors are, a very, very worthwhile thing for this space to have as a whole, and will create massive amounts of innovation. Okay, so we know where we want to get to, either a decentralized or permissionless, etc. How do we get there? Unfortunately, unlike the Virgin Mary, immaculate conception does not happen to decentralized protocols. You have to literally go through quite a bit in order to achieve that decentralization. A16Z recently put up a guide. This is a modification of that guide. I modified it to separate out product and tech to add a few other things just based on my experience of this, as to how to go from early stage to growth to later stage, and what it's like to kind of move through that sort of decentralized standard, right? So let me talk about what typically happens within a protocol. If you're starting a protocol from scratch, you have a development company, a devco, and that devco, it has centralized control over the initial version of the technology. Beyond that point, it typically then, over time, the network level decision making shifts towards a DAO or a foundation. And that devco should no longer be, ideally, the only development company building on the network. Now, yes, ideally you have product market fit before you give it away to the community. But what is product market fit in creating a protocol? It's not necessarily about the number of users. I feel like it's more about how many people are developing off your network. Ideally, you do want some users, but let's think about Ethereum, right? Ethereum was launched in 2015. I would argue that it truly had signs of product market fit in late 2016, mid 2017, when the sort of boom happened, right? So it didn't have product market fit when Vitalik sort of made it into its decentralized format in 2015, right? And then, when it comes down to things like tokens, this is, it's a very touchy subject because you get a lot of people who claim that this industry is all about the quick money grabs, and for some people it is. So typically speaking, I think that the best in class is where tokens are initially held between the development company and the foundation, and then over time, and again in connection with the decentralized goals being achieved, you airdrop them to the community. Now, mark my words, that airdrop or the mechanism by which you distribute to the community is the single most, one of the single most opportune time to create customer acquisition incentives that I've rarely seen moments in time where you can use something to make people do so much, right? And I've seen it being done for protocols like Helium, etc., where now they use their token incentives to create a global hardware network by incentivizing people with tokens. If you can do that, imagine what you can do. Now, my current feeling is that tokens should be locked up and distributed ideally over 4 years for investors, for staff, for people, etc. I got friends who do this, but I'm not a fan of lockups for a year and under. I can understand 2 years and 3 years, but I really think it takes some time and you want to create that ongoing incentive for the team that started the protocol. And you want to stop them from just cashing out really quickly, right? And I've seen that happen. And we want to stop this whole ability for protocols to dump in the community. And it's important we educate people so that they they pressure these protocols to take more long-term perspectives. But so over time, yes, there is a widespread token distribution. And then the last thing I'll say is with node operators, a lot of the time you start off permissioned, like I said, because otherwise you'll have if we had a permissionless network here, you get a bunch of Harvard students over, and then it'd be like it'd be a terrible class after that, right? And so in the beginning, you kind of want I think progressively you make it a permissioned network first, and then you introduce trusted entities in to test the code, etc. And then in the limit, it becomes a truly decentralized system. Before closing, I'd just like to point out that a lot of purists or maxis often point to progressive decentralization as an issue. They want immediate decentralization. But remember, Bitcoin wasn't immediately decentralized when Satoshi was running the first node. So if you just expand out the horizon, I believe that almost all legitimate protocols try to move towards decentralization. I know every protocol I've started has. And so it starts from the practically unavoidable centralized start of a protocol to the fully decentralized expression of the protocol. So in closing, I think that the application of decentralized technology to non-transaction use cases like data, like play-to-earn gaming, maybe even to social networks, I think the application to non-transaction use cases represents one of the ripest opportunities in Web3 today. And I encourage all of you, because you are some of the best and brightest in the world. You are the students at MIT, to create and to build these sorts of applications that go towards a trustless, a permissionless, a decentralized standard. Because I think that through doing so and through having more of those applications, that we essentially create a better world. And that's it for me. Thank you.